I'm going to say a lot of stuff on this video, and there's going to be a lot of information I'm going to give you, and then I'm going to give you my predictions for them. But one thing is absolutely guaranteed while watching this video. It will absolutely be longer than any of the nominated shorts. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the garage. Gerald here with you. I always take the Oscar short films pretty seriously, but that's not to say that I'm any more successful than any of you or anyone else when it comes to predicting them, because the Academy always seems to trip everybody up in these categories. Last year I went 2 for 3, which, believe me, is like a miracle upon the earth, as I usually only get 1, and there's been a couple years where I've blanked. But the last few years since I started doing it on YouTube is really when I dedicate all my time to kind of researching the players involved and making sure for sure to watch all of the films before the ceremony. A quick shout out to my peeps over at Roadside Attractions for getting me screeners for all of the shorts that I wasn't able to find online, which a lot of them you actually can. When I put up graphics and stuff on the screen, when I do my edit, I will tell you where you can watch the film if eligible. If not, Roadside is releasing them for, I believe, a 2-week span on Friday, February 20th at most AMC and Regal chains, and there may be some other chains participating as well. They're going to show all of the Oscar-nominated shorts, all 15 of them, and you can buy one ticket and go in and see all of them. They'll give you a program to tell you what order the movies are playing, if you've already seen one and you want to show up late or anything like that. So check your local listings, and I would highly, highly recommend that you seek these out. There's actually 2 of these films that we'll be talking about tonight when we get to the live action category that actually are 2 of my favorite movies of the year. Like, I was blown away by both of them. If they were feature length, they would absolutely be in my top 10 films of the year. We'll talk a little bit about them. Now, just so you know, a little disclaimer, when I go through this discussion, I'm going to attempt to not spoil the plot of any of these short films, especially like the live action ones, because obviously there's a narrative and there might be plot twists and things happen, and it's just like a regular movie, right? So I'm going to try to stay away from any like final act reveals or anything like that, but I am going to be talking about the plot and stuff like that. So if that kind of worries you or whatever and you don't want to do that, you can skip ahead. Now, at the very end of my video, I'll give you my actual prediction that right now I have locked in for what's going to win in the 3 short categories. That may change, so I do encourage you to follow me over at the Award Expert app. You can find me there and on Letterboxd, where I made a ranking of all these movies already under the Awards Garage. So I hope you'll give me a follow, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel as well, because I'll be talking award season until I'm blue in the face, and then I'll probably still keep talking about it. All right, first I want to start with the animated shorts. I'm going to pull up Letterboxd, and I feel like that's a useful tool. It's just my Google Chrome. Sorry for the unprofessionalism on the view here, but it just makes my life a little bit easier. So we'll start with these. I'm going to go through each nominee, kind of tell you what they're about, my impressions of them, kind of like my mini reviews of them. So this is one that I really, really love. Now, just because I loved it, which is what you're looking at right now, for example, Retirement Plan, a 5-star movie on Letterboxd for me, doesn't mean I'm predicting it to win. First of all, this is one of the shortest films at 7 minutes. It actually is the shortest film, I'm pretty sure. So Retirement Plan, the Letterboxd description just says, at apathy with his life, Ray dreams of the beauty and joy he will find in retirement. Sounds like a pretty lame, basic, like, what? And you got a dude in the field here with his shirt off, an older man. You know, kind of a cool style of animation, but also kind of like maybe somebody's kid drew that. It's just kind of weird at first glance, right? So it is narrated, Domhnall Gleeson. Let me move my camera over here. So it's narrated by this guy, Domhnall Gleeson. You guys might recognize him from these films, obviously the Harry Potter series, right? And About Time was a really good one, Ex Machina, of course. So he's a very popular actor. He narrates the film. It is a very fast-paced narration by him in the film. And what it does is it goes through essentially all of the activities in life that this gentleman can't wait to do that he hasn't really had a chance to do. Kind of like a bucket list, but not that dark. It's just like, because it starts kind of remedial, like, you know, I want to do gardening and I want to go hiking, and you know, it increasingly gets a little more crazy as he goes through his story. It just goes through all this different shit that he's never done in his life. He wants to perfect playing a video game and like just all this random stuff. And it's 7 minutes of just one after the other. I can't wait to do this. I'm going to do this. And it's like literally a sentence or two every time. So they list probably 100 things that he wants to do that he has never gotten to do in his life. And there's a line at the end of the movie, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's like, you know, because he's saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And then at the very end, he says, I'm going to wonder if the time that we have is all that we got. You know, and then the movie kind of ends.
I'll finally know if you have the time you have and then it ends, or if there is more time.
So the essential moral of the story for me, especially as somebody that's getting older, is that your life passes you by really quick, and you have to seize the opportunity to do the things that you want to do, no matter how meaningless or simple they sound. And it was a profoundly touching animated short at only 7 minutes, really less than that. If you factor in credits, it's probably like 6 minutes. And it just is so snappy, so quick. You could finish this video, pull it up on YouTube, and I wonder if it would touch you in the same way, especially if you're getting older, or if you have kids or grandkids or anything like that. Like, stuff just happens, man. Life just goes. And the next thing you know, it feels like 7 minutes. Now, something else I did, and if I'm looking over here, I'm looking at my notes. Something else I did is I did some research over the last week or so to come up with if there was any Oscar lineage with some of these films. And in looking at Retirement Plan specifically, I could not find anywhere where any of the major players in the film were previous Oscar nominees or winners, which is what I really look for. And when I was doing my research and making my little geek spreadsheet, I really was going by producers, actors, like Domhnall Gleeson would have been considered here, but of course he has never been nominated. Directors and writers, screenplay. If any of that stuff showed up, those top of the line creators of these shorts and they had been nominated, or definitely if they'd won in the past, I made note of that. There were none on Retirement Plan. Okay, so next up I want to talk about The Girl Who Cried Pearls. It's really living in that 4 to 5 star range. It is really, really good. If I watch this one again, I could probably very easily give it a 5 or a 4.5. At first watch, I gave it a 4. It says it's a haunting fable about a girl overwhelmed by sorrow, the boy who loves her, and how greed leads good hearts to wicked deeds. This is extremely striking animation. I actually watched a couple of behind the scenes of creating this film. It's stop motion. You can absolutely tell right out of the gate that it's stop motion animation. But it also incorporates digital animation into the faces and the mannerisms. To make a long story short, it starts out by a grandfather telling his granddaughter, who is in his office kind of snooping around, and she comes across this really kind of pristine, secluded, locked away pearl sitting in this, velvet jewelry box, just kind of sitting there, one single pearl. And she's kind of snooping around, and he starts kind of telling her the story of that single pearl and where it comes from. And that's where we get the bulk of our movie after that first couple minutes. Flashing back to when he was a young boy, probably 12 or 13 years old. And the rest of the movie plays out in that era. The essential story is that he's homeless as a little boy, has no family. We're not told the specifics, but I'm assuming his parents died or left him or whatever. And he's on his own. And he finds a abandoned apartment duplex to kind of sleep in for several nights, to kind of have shelter. And the adjacent apartment there, this young girl lives with her parents. And her mother, in this case, I think it's her stepmother actually, is extremely abusive verbally. The film implies physical abuse too, but it doesn't show it. And every night she cries herself to sleep because of the situation, her living situation. And she cries pearls, literal pearls. They come out of her tear ducts and they hit the wood floor of this old rickety, duplex, and they roll down the floor on a slant into the wall and end up coming out into the apartment that he's living in next door. Fast forward, that happens night after night after night. She keeps crying, and he keeps collecting these pearls. He decides to take the pearls to a pawnbroker. What he learns is that he can basically have anything he wants and will really not be homeless and be able to eat, really. But then from there, it goes on to more things, which is where the greed comes into the story here. But in order to do so, he's gained an affinity for the girl that lives next door, and he basically is in love with her, has a crush on her. And, he gets her gifts and stuff and leads them at her door to make her smile so she won't cry. But then he realizes if she doesn't cry, he's not going to have money to get the things he wants. And so it creates a conundrum around greed and commercialism and capitalism and, wants versus needs and what we will do to others to get what we want. So it is a very tangled story about how the young mind really adjusts to what's real, what's important, and what moral road you want to take. I mean, humans don't cry pearls. So there's a fantastical kind of fairy tale component to the story that he's telling his granddaughter. But the pearl was in his office, right? So there's a plot twist that I don't want to tell you because I think I didn't see it coming, and it was really cool. I thought it was just going to be a fantasy story, it's just supposed to be a symbol for whatever, which it is. But the other side of it is what actually it ends up being and the plot twist, and how that kind of is a gut punch to the lengths that society at the time went to for riches and for greed. Looking at the Oscar lineage, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciations here, but Chris Lavas and Maciek Szczerbowski were previous nominees in the animated short category. In 2008, it was a short film called Madame Tootly Pootly, and that was at the 80th Academy Awards. So they've been there before. It was a similar style of animation. I looked up the trailer for that one. Also very striking imagery, but they just upped their game here with this one. I mean, it's been, 15 years since that one was at the Oscars? Now, the last three I'm not like head over heels about, although they were pretty good. The Three Sisters I'll talk about next. This is a really weirdly drawn film. As you can really kind of see here with the way the images are drawn, these are the three sisters right here on the mountaintop. So it says three sisters live a lonely life on an isolated island, each in their own small house. One day, circumstances develop in such a way that they are forced to rent out one of their houses. They have these three homes, as you can see on the poster there. That's basically, they're right next to each other. They live together in one of them, and then they rent out the other two, and that's their source of income. Well, one day at the start of the movie, the two patrons that live in those other two houses, I think one of them dies and one of them leaves. So both are vacant now. So they each take a place. They have their own place now, three for three apartments, right? Well, they begin to realize eventually that they can't afford it. You know, they don't have any income. They can't have three sources of rent with no income. So they decide to move back in together and rent out the other two, but they have problems finding people to rent it. Well, one guy shows up out of nowhere on a boat one day. He kind of looks like Popeye the Sailor Man in the animation style, and he rents out one of the places. And so they kind of split time between the other two. So that's their source of income. Over the course of the film, it's 14 minutes long, so probably the last 9 to 10 minutes or so, is visual storytelling of the director telling us that the three sisters are attracted to this guy, and they have a desire for him, and they want to win his fancy. So they do different things to kind of get his attention. It's implied that they, have sex with each other, each of them with him, and they go into his apartment, come out with like their hair messed up and shit like that. So it's implied, doesn't show anything. It's really funny, but it also is kind of an interesting topical story about seeking male attention through a female perspective. This is a male director, so I don't know. I feel like I would have taken to this a little bit more had it been a female vision. I didn't really know what I was supposed to take away from it, even though it was enjoyable, because the ending is kind of a downer for the three sisters, and they just kind of end up back where they were alone, so it's not like an uplifting story, even though it is fun to watch and look at. And looking at my notes for this one, there is a prior Oscar nominee, which is the director. I'm going to butcher the name again, but Konstantin Bronzit was a prior Oscar nominee on 2 occasions, both for animated short, Laboratory Love Story and We Can't Live Without Cosmos from 2009 and 2016. So you do have some pedigree there with the Oscars. So that is something to consider when you're predicting the shorts. But I've already got one that has that pedigree that I think is stronger. And the last two we're going to talk about here in animated will probably go a little bit quicker because I wasn't super high on these. I didn't hate them. Like I said, there wasn't a bad one in the bunch this year. But this is called Forever Green. What I will say about this one, though, is it was probably my favorite animation style. It's probably my favorite visually. But the problem is it just kind of, after the novelty wears off, it didn't keep me. It didn't grab me and hold on to me, aside from that, oh, this is really cool animation. But after a minute, you're just kind of okay, I know what this is. That it reminds me kind of like a pop-up book brought to life. So it does have kind of that 3-dimensional style, but it's not hand-drawn. It is digital animation, but it's like stop motion mixed with 3D printer or 3D art. An orphaned bear cub finds a home with a fatherly evergreen tree until his hunger for trash leads him to danger. So this is literal what it's saying, but also it is a very on-the-nose symbolic message in the movie, which is also what kind of weighed it down a little bit for me, because it was too oh, okay, you're not being subtle at all about this. Ostensibly, it's a story that really wanted me to, or made me kind of remember the embrace that we should have for Mother Nature and how we should be taking care of our world. And the masses, we don't really, we don't. And I'm guilty of a lot of things that would go against the environment as well. But that's the inherent built-in kind of narrative here. And then you have this young cub in this case, but you could say children, and their hunger for trash, can lead them astray, right? And you can fill in trash, the blank there, with really anything you want, social media, crime, whatever would veer them off path of having a successful, career or life or adolescence or whatever. So it's not trying to be subtle in any way whatsoever. And it was saved by the animation for me because it was a really good watch. Like, I really enjoyed it visually. I watched this with my young son, who was almost 7 years old, and he was engaged the whole time. And when it comes to my notes for prior Oscar history, there is none. So there's no lineage for Forever Green, at least in my research. It is really good animation, though. It's staggering, honestly, the style. And it makes me wonder, actually, if this is a style that we'll see a little bit more of. I hope we do, because I really like the way it looked. And like I said, it kept my little one's engagement the whole time. So great short. I just don't think it stands a chance to win this year. The last one is a film called Butterfly or Papillon, which I assume is how you say it in French, right? I think. Oh boy, let's see. Yeah, French. I was right. Okay, I'll keep that in because I was right. This one I wasn't as high on. It was the lowest rated for me. I mean, I did like it, but I gave it 2.5 out of 5. I want to rewatch it. It's a visually striking animation, like all of these are. It's hand drawn. It looks like a painting come to life, really. But I just couldn't get into the story. I don't know why, because it is a interesting premise. It says a Jewish North African middle-aged man's swim in the sea triggers memories of his earlier life as a professional swimmer during World War II. So it has an important narrative. He's a professional swimmer. It's his love. He loves doing it. But it does take him back to a place that was not as happy for him. And it shows us some of those flashbacks. It's 16 minutes long, too, which I think hurt it for me. If this had been in that 10-minute range, I probably would have been engaged all the way through. Overall, it is a tremendous effort, and I think this actually could show up as a potential winner. So a big thing for you to keep in mind if you want to go out on a limb and predict Butterfly, which I'm not even saying that would be a bad prediction. Ron Dyens is one of the producers for Butterfly, and he was also a producer on Flow, which of course kind of came up as an underdog pick last year to win Best Animated Feature over essentially The Wild Robot, which was thought to be the frontrunner. So, Flo was a feel-good upset win last year from Latvia. Same name. He's been there before with the Academy, so that's a possible checkbox on the win column there. Butterfly would rank 5th out of the animated shorts for me personally, but it is a possibility. All right, next up, I'm going to switch to the documentary shorts. We'll go over those. All are really powerful this year. I cried at I think all of these, definitely 4 of them. So I'm going to start with my personal highest ranked in the category, which would be a film called All the Empty Rooms. It says a journalist and photographer set out to memorialize the bedrooms left behind by children killed in school shootings. So Steve Hartman is not necessarily a previous Oscar contender, but he is a pretty well-known figure in journalism. He was on CBS News in the morning show, I believe, for several years. Actually, he might still be. I'm not entirely sure. During the kind of epidemic that we went through as a country, and really we still are, of these constant school shootings, he was the reporter that they would have kind of come in at the end of the evening news or morning news and give a feel-good story about a dog saving its owner from a fire, or a grandma baking cookies for a World War II veteran, or whatever, you know what I mean? Those kind of feel-good stories, which are great. But so anyway, he was doing that for years and kind of said, nothing's changing. Why am I still doing this? And he actually has a dialogue in the film where he says, it got to a point where there was only a week or two between these mass shootings that I would basically use the same script that I'd used for the previous one and just kind of change the adjectives and the players that, the victims. But it was the same thing happening over and over and over again, and, nothing was changing. So he started this project several years ago with his friend who's a professional photographer, where they would reach out to the families of the victims, these kids, and they wanted to create a lookbook or a kind of a professional scrapbook, I guess. I'm not sure what the phrase would be, for the families to memorialize their children. And he thought it was so striking that a lot of the families had just left their kids' rooms the way they were the day they died, had not been touched. And we're talking about dirty laundry, posters on the wall, jewelry, whatever. They just left it as if they were waiting for them to come back home to it. I don't think this movie's intention was to be emotionally manipulative. Some people could see it that way and it could hurt it in the voting and stuff for the Oscars. I don't think it was, though. I think it was like, this is what this is. And, if it moves you emotionally, then it moves you. And it really should, frankly, especially if you have kids. So it was like, man, just so gut-wrenchingly depressing and sad, because you add in the element that there's not really a light at the end of the tunnel either, at least here in the US. And that's what makes it even like just linger after you watch it. It would be different if this was like a snapshot of something historical. That was a dark time. I'm so glad we are here now, but we're not really past it yet. And some of these kids are just going to school. My kids go to school every day. Every day they go to school. And, I can't be there with them in school. I want to be when stuff like this happens in this country. And, the movie theaters, right? Churches, any shopping malls. These are places that people, especially kids, should just be able to go to and be at. They just had the one on the news the other day as I'm recording this at the ice skating rink when a family was watching their young son play hockey. Like, you should be able to go to your kid's sporting event, without the fear of somebody coming in there with a gun. So it really kind of brings that to light from a very emotional perspective. When it comes to Oscar heritage with all the empty rooms, you just have the notoriety of Steve Hartman as a newsman, as somebody that's been kind of adjacent to the industry for a long time, but no Oscar pedigree here. The next one I'll look at would be what I would rank second among the documentary shorts, and that's one called Armed Only with a Camera, The Life and Death of Brent Renaud. You can watch this one on HBO Max currently. Brent Renaud and his brother Craig Renaud are documentary filmmakers. And they're, a writing, directing duo of brothers. Brent was a photojournalist who became kind of attached to U.S. wartime conflicts and would find himself kind of with U.S. troops and would be recording that as a photojournalist. And he did that for many, many years. And that just kind of became what he was that was kind of his career. That was kind of what he did, especially since U.S. is always in the war business, right? And it says on March 13th, 2022, Brent Renaud was killed by Russian soldiers, the first American journalist to die while reporting on the war in Ukraine. His brother and frequent collaborator, Craig Renaud, recovered Brent's body and his final recordings from Ukraine and brought them back to their childhood home in Arkansas. It talks about, Brent's career, obviously, and, his kind of drive and desire to show these wars from inside the walls and from a real life lens, figuratively and literally, with his camera. And he was just delivering the truth through his photos. That's all he was doing, And like the synopsis on Letterboxd said there, he was the first American journalist that was killed while, in one of these conflicts reporting on the war. And somebody said, shortly after his death, there were a few others actually. And I think it was in 2022 or 23. I can't remember who it was. Somebody pretty prominent in news was quoted as saying that being a photojournalist is now in one of the top 5 most dangerous professions in the world, trying to do their job. It's crazy. And, there's also an added element to this documentary of the shock value of seeing his body after it was killed, because other journalists were there with him, on this mission or journey or whatever. And they recorded it and took photos of it. And the documentary does not hold back from showing you. It literally shows you minutes after he was killed by the Russian soldiers. His body there, not blurred out, nothing. So just be warned about that too, because it's obviously, graphic advisory. And then when the body comes back, after it's been taken care of, etc., and it comes back to America, they're showing it there too, because they're preparing it for the funeral. And one of the guys that's filming with his brother Craig says, why are you doing this? Why do you want me to film his body like this? And Craig says, because Brent wants me to. He would want me to show you, or to show everyone, what war is doing to people, essentially innocent people. War is costly, and there's no reason to hide from that. There's no reason to try to blur out that fact. That is a fact of what it is. Whether you're pro-war or anti-war doesn't really matter. War is costly, and I don't think either side would disagree with that. Lives are lost every single time there's a war conflict on whatever sides are fighting. So, it's not even political. It just is what it is. So this is a tough watch for sure. I think it's the second longest of all the 15 nominated shorts this year. And then when it comes to the lineage for this one, there's also nothing I could find in terms of the producers, director, etc. Obviously, the brothers are credited as the directors, but nothing I could see from an Oscar standpoint for this one either. It's just a really powerful documentary. And it also has that tie-in of the Russian-Ukraine conflict and that war and how that narrative has kind of been present the last couple years at the Oscars. So if they want to continue honoring stories that shine a light on that, this would be one that would make that pretty easy to do. The next one I'm going to look at is another one that you can currently watch on HBO. HBO's got some great documentaries this year, a couple that actually didn't even get nominated. Also, they also have the Alabama Solution, which is nominated for feature documentary, which is also on HBO, by the way. But this one's called The Devil is Busy, so I also gave this one 4 stars. At a Atlanta abortion clinic besieged by protesters, the director of operations, Tracy, takes necessary risks to safeguard staff and patients. So this is a timely narrative, right, about abortion, pro-life, pro-choice, etc., which is always present in our political climate, at least here in the U.S. Even though that's present, kind of built in as the foundation of the story here, what is really, really intriguing and why this documentary really works and doesn't seem like kind of a played-out, preachy thing is because this is shot as a day in the life of this woman. And we don't really ever learn her allegiance either. Now, she, runs an abortion clinic, so you would presume she's more liberal, but it never gets into that. It never really discusses the politics of it. But it just literally, instead of talking about abortion rights and, abortion clinics and the court systems around all this stuff, Roe v. Wade, that stuff's mentioned, but instead of that being like the focus of the documentary, it's literally a documentary about Tracy, if that makes sense. This like everyday person, not a celebrity or whatever, just this woman named Tracy. So think of it as kind of like a documentary kind of following her around in her daily life. And she just happens to be the director at this abortion clinic in Atlanta, which the reason it's notable is because it's one of the very few that are not being shut down by the government or it's against the law to go to. So they accept from all over the country because a lot of states are banning it. So a lot of people come from hundreds of miles away. I think they had one lady they talked to from like the New England area that drove down to Atlanta, from Texas, and they're converging in Georgia at these clinics that are still available to women. That's why it worked for me. I mean, it still probably would have worked for me anyway. It was a really cool POV to have. And, she'll be trying to protect the patients that are coming in because there's protesters outside every day. There's been previous threats on the clinic, and that stuff happens, and at the end of the day, whether you're pro-choice or whether you're pro-life, at the end of the day, these women are trying to be seen for health care reasons, for their health. And they can't be, seen medically in their home state, wherever that is, for whatever reason that is, probably political or court mandated or whatever. Doctors are being arrested and fined and all kinds of shit for, seeing women in certain states if it has to do with abortions. This one clocks in at 32 minutes. This one is one that I could also not find any ties to Oscar history before. So far in the documentaries of the ones we've gone over, there's been no confirmed Oscars history, and those are my top 3. So next up, I'm going to look at one called Perfectly Estrangedness, and yes, that's the correct page there. In the dazzling incandescence of an unknown desert, 3 donkeys discover an abandoned astronomical observatory and the universe, a sensorial cinematic exploration of what a story can be. This one, as you can see, was ranked 4th for me. It's not my favorite, but this is easily the most fascinating watch of all the shorts. In my review, I said this is the film version of those webcams that watch animals in the zoo. The main difference here is the stunning cinematography and the melancholic score. They inject feelings of sorrow, dread, and loneliness into the proceedings, but all the while you wonder if it's a magic trick of manipulation. It will test most people's patience, but this was a fascinating watch. It seemingly has so much to say, but deliberately shows or tells us nothing. And it was profound, to be honest. This is going to be a simplification for sure, and I apologize to the filmmakers because this is a positive thing I'm about to say. But there's no other way for me to articulate it to you than just to say this is essentially these 3 donkeys wandering around a vast landscape. There's roads, there's desert landscapes. They do happen upon an observatory. There's nighttime shots of them. Really, really good cinematography, mind-blowing cinematography. And the score, I think the music and the score to this film is what kept me like this to 3 donkeys walking around a vast desert. The shots and the score were just breathtaking. I was locked in, and it was so well composed because it would give you the feelings that I think they wanted to elicit, whether that's thinking it's profound or feeling sad or lonely or, like an epiphany, like you just found something important. So it was a very deep watch where nothing happens, which might sound like a chore for most people, but that's really how I would describe it, is that it really taps into something almost like beyond storytelling. But I do know I was fascinated by it, and it was just a transfixing watch. I also don't really know why it's in the documentary category. And again, I apologize. I don't know what it's cataloging as a documentary. This could very easily have been in the live action category, I think, because it doesn't really give us a documented, factual retelling of anything that happened or that they're capturing. There's always kind of a weird pick in this category, and I did predict this when it got nominated, because it just seems so weird. And that was before I even saw it. So now it definitely makes sense why it's here. I think it might be too weird to win. A lot of times they'll get nominated, but those weird ones won't walk away with the gold. It's always something with kind of a more important newsworthy narrative, which all the other ones have. Just fascinating. It was just crazy to watch. It was like, what are they telling me here? Nothing, but why am I so entranced by what's happening? So I could not find any prior Oscars history with Perfectly a Strangeness. I don't think the filmmaker Alison McAlpine had any Oscar lineage prior, so that leaves only one to talk about, which does have the only tie to Oscars history, which could go a long way. I'm finding it kind of ironic, I guess, and funny that the least favorite in these categories so far are the ones that have the most Oscar history. I don't know, that's weird. So maybe don't go with what I like, maybe, I don't know. Children No More Were and Are Gone. This is an extremely important narrative and story and watch, and especially from an international foreign affairs viewpoint. So I don't want my score or anything I say to take away from you seeking this out when it's available, because I think it should be seen, or let me put it this way, I think the story should be known. Whether you choose to seek the story out through this documentary or some other means, we shouldn't be blinded to these types of things that are going on in other parts of the world. In Tel Aviv, activists gather weekly to scream their opposition to the genocidal war in Gaza with a silent vigil for the children killed by Israel. Their protest, considered a betrayal by many, is an act of defiance that calls to confront a reality we must not ignore, which is exactly what I was saying. If you look at this picture here, and I'll probably put some clips on the video, this group of silent protesters who do not utter a word while they're protesting, but instead they bring these images that families provided from social media or their home or whatever of these children that were killed as a result of the conflict in Gaza, Palestine, Israel conflict. That's it. So the main issue with why I only gave it 2.5 stars and that it was good and it's important is it's too long. It's 30 minutes, and I would say, I'm speculating here, and this is off the top of my head, but I would say probably 20, anywhere from 17 to 20 of those 30 minutes is just them standing in a protest. And like I said, it's silent, so there's no dialogue really. Except from the passersby, most of them are very hateful. Why are you doing this? You don't know what's going on. Israelis are being killed every day, and there's hostages that they haven't set free. And what it kind of showed me that I didn't really think about before, which is why I do think it's important, is it showed me that the opposition to the protest didn't care about the source of the protest, the core issue of the dead children as a result of the conflict. They cared more about which side they were on. So they were steadfast in their belief system and believing that their side was right, regardless of the X thousands of kids that were killed, which to me is mind-blowing, because I don't know how you don't stop and have pause and go, oh, wait a second, how many kids died last year because of this? And at least on film, none of them had that realization. They would all more rather kind of yell their viewpoint at the protesters as to why they should not be protesting the conflict. Kind of like we were talking about with politics earlier with abortion, and people can have arguments and have opposition and their belief system and their history and their families and what they believe, religion, this, that. I'm not going to get into what that should be for any mass group of people, but regardless, as a humanity, we should be these children should not be dying in this conflict. This should not be a side effect of the war. I mean, we're talking thousands. There were newborns in these pictures. It's a very important watch, and it would devastate anyone who wants to pair it with Henry Job in a double feature, which I don't think I recommend, by the way. But it's a very similar story, right? Because Henry Job was a 6-year-old girl in that film. And if you guys know and you follow my channel, that was my #1 international film of the year last year. It's even weird to say I liked a film like that because it's so harrowing and tragic. But cinematically and what it did to me emotionally. It was my number one film from non-US last year. Let's just say that. And this is like a short documentary telling very similar stories, but telling it from the protest line, the picket line, versus, the call center that we get the story from in Henry Jop. Now, when looking at Children No More, Hilda Medelia, Sheila Nevins are producers. Sheila, however, one of the producers, was a prior Oscar nominee. She was nominated in 2024, so recently, for the ABCs of Book Banning. And if I recall, I'm sorry, Sheila, I think that was my least favorite short that year too. I'm sorry. It's not personal by any way. I think that one was one that I thought was kind of emotionally manipulative. It had the kids reading these stories, and whenever kids get emotional, you get emotional, at least I do. So if I'm recalling correctly, but anyway, she's been there before. The Academy has responded to the material before, but that was as a producer. So, that's the only documentary short in the 5 that has ties to the Oscars, which is something I tell you guys just so if you want to consider that for your predictions, which heads us over to the live action shorts, and there are some good ones this year. This is kind of going to be a shallow take or a review, I guess. Before I say it, I do want to tell you this film does have something to say. This is a film that is essentially, surrounding like women's empowerment, women's history, how women are viewed through the male gaze, any number of, fill in the blank when it comes to kind of like the plight of women over the course of a century or more. So this is called Jane Austen's period drama, and it's a play on words where period drama is like it's a period piece, right? The film takes place in the era of Jane Austen. It is also a play on words for her having her period, as in menstrual. England in 1813, in the middle of a long-awaited marriage proposal, Miss Estrogenia Talbot, listen to some of these names, gets her period. Her suitor, Mr. Dickley, mistakes the blood for an injury, and it soon becomes clear that his expensive education has missed a spot. So the short kind of, look at these names. So Estrogenia Dickley, right? Lavinia Talbot, Virginia Talbot, all right? Miss Bitts, Dr. Bangley.
You are engaged to Miss Bumblesnatch.
Have you not heard? Miss Bumblesnatch has run away with Sir Hangledangers.
So the names kind of tell you this is a comedy. This is a straight up, almost slapstick, honestly, comedy. But it is played so straight-faced. As soon as I watch this, there's only 13 minutes, about 12 if you take the credits out. It's only about 12 minutes. As soon as I finish watching this, I cannot tell you how fast I shared this to my wife and my daughter to watch this. My daughter's 24, by the way, so it's not too crazy. I thought I was in fucking stitches watching this movie because they play it so like The Age of Innocence or, Cruel Intentions or like, Marie Antoinette. Like everything was so proper and the English dialect was perfect and like played so dramatically. They don't break character. They don't laugh. There's no, fourth wall breaking, The Office look. It's like they play it like it's a real deal, dramatic, Yorgos Lanthimos style, like period film, But it has all this like built-in hilarious comedic dialogue, like I said, while still telling this important story through a woman's POV. I was fucking dying at this. One of the funniest things I've seen, honestly, in like 5 years. So I gave that bad boy 5 stars immediately, as quick as I could on Letterboxd. Let's see, any Oscar lineage with this one? There is none. And when it comes to the actors, there was none in play there, but they're all really, really good. Like I said, super committed to the bit, never winking at the camera. Played it so straight. Man, so funny, but also such a well-made short. All right, then we're kind of looking at a tie for my next 2, to be honest. But the next one I'll talk to you guys about is one called Two People Exchanging Saliva. And I just saw on social media, I think tonight, actually, or maybe it was yesterday, that Laura Dern, I think, was doing a Q&A and screening this movie recently. So they are pushing this movie out there. This is, I'm not even joking, you guys. This is like one of the best well-made movies. And not to mention, I love the narrative too. But one of the just the greatest films I saw this year in terms of the craft. It is like striking to watch. It is really, really good. Let me read this to you and then I'll kind of explain to you my take on it. In a society where kissing is punishable by death and people pay for things by receiving slaps to the face, and Janine, an unhappy woman, shops compulsively in a department store, There, she becomes fascinated by a playful salesgirl. Despite the prohibition of kissing, the two become close, raising the suspicions of a jealous colleague. The lady that plays the shopkeeper in this, Luana Bajrami, I was really impressed with recently, actually, in a movie called A Private Life with Jodie Foster that I just saw about a month ago. But you might recognize her. She was also in Happening, which I believe was a French film, and of course, Portrait of a Lady on Fire. She was in that. So I really liked her, and she was really, really good in this. This film does have some ties to the Oscars, I believe. We'll touch on that here in a second. So this movie is basically a lesbian love story, or like a forbidden lesbian love story, but it incorporates the elements of like Hunger Games to the proceedings. But aside from being so well crafted and such a beautiful film, it's just a really like immersive type of storytelling. You get locked in, or at least I did. The title is also really striking. That could go a long way in voting. I'm not trying to be funny, but I think that might actually be one of the things that helped it get nominated. They usually go for the really crazy titles. But she'll go there, she'll want to buy a dress or whatever, right? She gets the dress, she takes it up to the cashier, and the cashier proceeds, okay, this is going to be $39 or whatever she says. And the lady says, okay. And she kind of steps off to the side of the counter. And the cashier puts on a glove and goes around the counter and starts slapping her 39 times. Or whatever, because that's the cost of the dress. That's the kind of like setup of this dystopian future. There's different montages in the movie where they won't let people buy toothpaste. It's like on the black market to get like a toothbrush and toothpaste, mouthwash, that kind of stuff. They don't want you to have clean breath or fresh breath because they're afraid you'll be tempted to kiss somebody. So everybody in this future has horrible breath on purpose. And if you don't, then they arrest you and like question you and all this stuff. They check you when you go into a public place to make sure you have bad breath. There's people that do it and they make faces like, oh God. So it's like just such a far out concept that you go, man, but then you stop and you go, yeah, I mean, this kind of seems real, which is kind of weird, you know, but it does play on a lot of different kind of timely narratives, and the style of the film with the French New Wave and the black and white and the high stakes. Because if you get caught kissing, and well, it does tell you in the synopsis, but if you get caught kissing, they kill you. There's literally a like landfill kind of, and they show this in the movie a couple times. There's like a landfill type situation where there's literally like a pile of bodies instead of trash from people that have been killed from kissing other people in this era. So in looking at Oscar lineage for this one, the main thing that I'll point out to you is that Julianne Moore, the actress and previous Oscar winner for Still Alice, is a producer on this film. She's an executive producer, and Isabelle Huppert was an Oscar nominee for Elle back in 2017, and she's a producer in the film also. So there's pretty big names, honestly, and they're doing Q&As, they're doing viewings. I think this one and the next one that I'm going to mention to you are the two that you're going to have to pick one, because we're not really going to know. They're both going to have great resumes. It's going to be a matter of which one's going to go with the Academy, but this one makes a lot of sense to me for predictions. And Vicky Krieps, by the way, who of course was in Phantom Thread, she was recently in the Ed Gein story on Netflix. She's been a mother, father, sister, brother, or father, mother, sister, brother she was in this year. She's the narrator in the film. So you also have a pretty big name in Vicky Krieps too. So there's a lot of bigger names attached in one way or another to this, and with the different screenings and Q&As they're doing with celebrities, and the title, which I know is crazy, but honestly that sometimes goes a long way, and it just looks so good. It is such a well-made film. All right, so that's one that I would keep your eye on. But guess what? When we're talking about the craft of filmmaking, the next one that I'm going to show you is just as well made. A different style of cinematography and visuals, but also just as wonderfully made. So this one's called The Singers from director Sam Davis, who also has ties to the Academy. He was the cinematographer, I believe, or editor, or possibly both, on Period End of Sentence, which won short film recently. And then there's some other Oscar ties that I'm going to mention here in a moment when I look at my notes for that. An impromptu singing contest at a dive bar turns a lonely night into a soul-bearing moment of shared harmony. It didn't mention it on Letterboxd. I pulled it up here on Google. This short, I knew it was based on an old Russian literature, like a short story. So it's a 19th century short story of the same name, The Singers, by Ivan Turgenev, which was a very kind of like famous but posthumously famous author in Russia, I believe. It modernizes a classic story which was found in George Saunders' book, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, about downtrodden patrons at a pub connecting through an impromptu singing competition. So all that to say, that sounds kind of cheesy, right? Like a bunch of dudes sitting around a bar singing. That's kind of what I thought my initial reading of the synopsis of this. This is another quick one. 17 minutes, really around 15 or so when you take out the fluff. The way Sam Davis shoots this film Maybe it's because I'm a dude that's a little bit older. I just turned 50. I don't know. That could be a bias there. Just to let you guys know, give you a heads up. That's the inherent narrative. But the way this is shot and filmed is very intimate, first of all. If Sam Davis sees this, or if I get a chance to talk to him, I'm going to tell him immediately that the way the film is shot, and because of that, it's astounding to me that he was able to create a connection to so many characters in like a 15-minute window. The bartender, there's a war veteran there. There's a guy that's kind of like overzealous and, is the loudmouth drunk guy or whatever. There's so many different people at different points in their kind of journey, but they all have a shared connection through this bar from a physical, tangible standpoint, but also through their loneliness or despair, which you kind of get the vibe that they're all suffering from. And it's a found family film at the end of the day, because they're there. The bartender says, hey, I got a $100 bill here. Let's sing. They're playing tunes on the jukebox. Whoever impresses me the most, I'm going to be the judge. You get the $100. And it goes around the room and they all take a stab at singing these songs. And the bartender eventually ends up doing a version of, I think it's Bill Withers, I want to say. I apologize if not, but I think it's a Bill Withers tune that he absolutely nailed. A couple other people sing, and they kind of keep like one-upping each other. And each singer is doing a little bit better than the previous one, even though they're all really good. All these dudes kind of coming together, metaphorically, but also kind of physically in this triumphant moment of not really caring who wins the $100, but just showing that they still have something to give the world. Whether that's through their voice or expression or whatever, was really touching to me. And again, it could be my bias as an old dude, but I really responded to this. And this is shot so beautifully, dimly lit, but on purpose, creating the claustrophobia and the loneliness, making you a part of it in that bar. And the music is obviously wonderful, tied into it. I also found out later after seeing it, which made me even more impressed with it, that Sam Davis and some producers in the film, maybe casting folks, found actual singers on social media that do their own, just sing songs on TikTok or YouTube or whatever for fun, original songs that are really good. That's where the cast came from. So these are all kind of like non-actors, social media personalities, if you will. But it would be like if I could sing, which I can't, by the way, and Sam Davis found me and asked me to come be in this movie. I can't act, first of all, maybe some of these dudes can, so not taking anything away from them, but you would think all of these guys are seasoned actors. I mean, seriously. So I think they tapped into maybe something they're actually going through in their life. So it's kind of meta in that way too. This is really a really fucking good movie. And I've seen Sam Davis doing various interviews and podcasts and stuff on the circuit when the movie came out, I believe last year, but even more so recently because of the Oscar nomination. And this one, and they both just got me. When I started this video out and I said that there were two films that I would put in my top 10 of the year, it was this one and Two People Exchanging Saliva. I think very, very highly of this film. And I want to show you guys, I mentioned period end of sentence earlier, but let me show you some of the other accolades for Sam Davis here and for the people behind the singers. So in addition to being a cinematographer on period end of sentence, Sam Davis was also a prior Oscar nominee for documentary short for Nai Nai and Wai Po, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And that was back in 2024, so pretty recently. And like I said, he's out there. He's pushing this film. And another big thing that this film has going for it that I don't think any of the others in this category can say is that it's on Netflix. So you can watch The Singers on Netflix right now. It's in their Oscar lineup that they have a category for that. And that's the only one in this category that you can watch pretty easily streaming on Netflix. All right, just two more to talk about real quick in the live action categories. I knew this video was going to run too long. Butcher's Stain, I gave a 3.5. I enjoyed it. The story follows Samir, an Arab butcher falsely accused by his manager of removing hostage posters, forcing him to fight for his job and innocence amidst rising prejudice. So this is another story about the Gaza-Palestinian or Israeli-Palestinian conflict in Gaza. This guy, Samir, is a father. He works in a grocery store as a butcher. We kind of get to see the everyday life. And they have the Israeli hostage posters in their break room. Have you seen these people, remember these hostages, etc., kind of like a memorial type thing. And every day throughout the workday, somebody ends up keeps ripping them off the wall. And because of his heritage and background, people start to accuse Samir of doing it. And so the film kind of turns into a did he or didn't he story, while also kind of showing us a different POV or angle of the conflict in Gaza. So another one that's an important movie, but I don't think as impactful as like the Children No More documentary, or especially Voice of Henry Job, which would be the most impactful, I would say, of the ones I've seen. I did like it, especially as like a narrative short. It was really good. And the actor that played Samir, which is Omar Samir, really good. Like, you really believe that he was kind of having this battle within himself about his job, because he also has a kid in the movie that we find out from a previous marriage, and they're kind of sharing custody. So he obviously needs money to see his kid. And so that's motivating him a little bit. But then he also, of course, has his religious beliefs and where he stands in the conflict. And it's all really fascinating and engaging. And thanks to the performances in the movie, I think it's really good. I think this is another one that could be dangerous because it's such an important narrative in the live action category, that, you know, some of the other ones are more so for like entertainment value, if that makes sense. And this one's obviously got something to say, and not just trying to entertain you. It's talking about a very of the moment situation that the world is witnessing. The Butcher Stain, there is no Oscars ties that I could find when I was looking for my research of that one. So nothing that's going to really give this one a leg up. It's just going to depend on, are they going to pick the one movie in the category that has like an important, timely, real world happening right now narrative, because this is the only one, just so you guys know. If that's your main criteria, you would probably want to pick Butcher Stain. Sorry, I'm getting hoarse. This is not going to be 2 hours when I do the edit, but I'm going on 2 hours of recording about these shorts. I really liked them, so I had a lot to say. All right, so the last one we'll talk about is A Friend of Dorothy, directed by Lee Knight. There is some Oscar ties here. We'll talk about that in a second. Some very interesting ones that I wasn't aware of, actually. Dorothy is a lonely widow whose body is failing, but her mind remains as bright as ever. When 17-year-old JJ accidentally kicks his football into her garden, soccer ball, he upends Dorothy's daily routine of pills, prunes, and crosswords, and an unlikely friendship blossoms. Despite being worlds apart in every way, the two come to find that they have more in common than they could ever imagine. So, long story short, JJ is a gay man. He meets Dorothy, who, by the way, is played by Miriam Margolyes, I love, of course, from the Harry Potter films, Magnolia, but yeah, I mean, you can see some of her credits here. But here, let me move my camera, I keep doing this. But yeah, what a delight, there she is. So that's Dorothy in the movie, and I know her specifically from the Harry Potter franchise, of course. Movie was good, I gave it 3.5, I liked it. I think it's a little too like bubblegum pop, a little too like, oh, British, you know, feel good. I don't really know how to articulate what I'm saying there, but it does have ties to the Academy. It has some pretty big names in it, in addition to Margolyes. So it's possible. It is a fun movie. It's a fun watch, but that might be what hurts it. I think they're going to want to do something that's a little more impactful when it comes to the win. That's why I also think like Jane Austen probably won't win, just because they're great and they're fun and they make you feel good and you enjoy it, but you don't go, man, that really got me, you know, that really hit me. Now, there is some emotional stuff in Friend of Dorothy. Again, I'm trying not to spoil the live action ones, but I don't think it's going to be like as emotional of a watch as some of the other ones in the category. Some other people that you'll find in this: Stephen Fry, you see here, also a British actor that you've seen in the Harry Potter series, ironically, but also like the Lord of the Rings series. So you got a pretty good cast here. I say give it a shot, because I really enjoyed this one. I just don't know that it's win competitive, if you will. When it comes to Oscar ties, it might be. So an extra major player, not necessarily like a nominee or a winner, is Stephen Daldry. He was nominated for Best Director for Billy Elliot in 2001, The Hours in 2003, and The Reader in 2009. He was the director on all three of those Oscar-nominated films. And he's an executive producer on Friend of Dorothy. So he's not like, I don't know, he didn't have his hands in the pie, I guess, when it comes to like creating the film. But depending on how far his name has stretched since the last time he was there, which I guess would have been 2009 for The Reader, you know, if there's still people there from that era of the Academy, or he has enough draw with people that he knew then, Stephen Daldry could be a tie that this film's going to benefit from. I just think that the kind of style of this movie and Jane Austen in this category are too, and this is going to sound weird, but just too like fun and light for something that would win in this category. Now, the last thing I'm going to do to wrap up this video is I'm going to give you my prediction for what I think is going to win, and then I'll also give you a runner-up or a wild card that I think would win if that one does not. So let's start with animated feature. My animated feature winner, I probably already kind of gave it away when I was talking about some of these, but it's going to be The Girl Who Cried Pearls. I think it's a narrative that's going to speak to them, and I think even if for some reason it didn't, the visuals are just going to blow them away with the stop motion style, which is really the only one in the category. My wild card or runner-up in the category is ironically the one that I ranked 5th among the nominees, and that's Butterfly, but it's the only one that has prior Oscar ties, and that's with Flow, which was the animated feature winner last year. So I think that may go a long way. When it comes to documentary feature, I think the power of Netflix in this category is going to go a long way. And also, it was the most emotionally impactful watch of all the shorts that I saw. And that's All the Empty Rooms. It is an extremely timely narrative that is still going on and has been going on for over 20 years in terms of gun violence in America. And even though the Academy has a lot of international voters, I'm sure they sympathize with that kind of epidemic that we've been going through. So I think All the Empty Rooms is your winner this year. But I will say that the runner-up is Children No More, Were and Are Gone. And there is ties there to the Oscars. I mentioned was one of the producers who got nominated for the ABCs of Book Burning a couple years ago. So that helps, but also that's the important one. You know, in addition to what I'm saying about All the Empty Rooms, that one's important on like a global level. And then the toughest category for me is live action short, because I love all these movies so much. But I think it's either going to be The Singers or Two People Exchanging Saliva. I'm going to give the nudge to Two People Exchanging Saliva just because of the mere filmmaking involved. It looks literally like, you know, like Nouvelle Vague from Linklater. That's what it literally looks like, but it's 30 minutes long. And actually, I liked it a little bit better than Nouvelle Vague. It's just really good. It's a really good story, a really well-made movie. Some big-name actors attached to it. Julianne Moore's a producer. Isabelle Huppert. The Singers is going to be my wild card if they go for that kind of like indie auteur pick that, you know, is seemingly for entertainment, but at the same time, it has so much to say for a specific demographic of which I happen to be in. So I didn't want my bias to take over there either. But I do think it's an easy number 2. And Sam Davis, the filmmaker, also has ties to the Oscars, being nominated before. And he was a cinematographer on a winning short as well. So this is not new ground for him either. Like I said, 2 hours of talking about these Oscar shorts. But you know what? I really love them. And I love trying to get the word out there for these films. Especially now that they've been nominated. You can probably find most of them on YouTube, Vimeo, Netflix in some cases, especially for the documentaries, HBO Max. And like I said, Roadside Attractions picked up the distribution rights to release them in cinemas. So support theaters if you can, because I think I'm actually going to do that. It's like the entire runtime, I think, is like 2.5 hours for all 15 of them. It's like a playlist, basically. You just go in and marathon all the shorts, and that comes out in cinemas to most major chains, I believe, on February 20th, and that'll be running for, I think, 2 weeks, at least here in the U.S. So check them out at your local Cineplex if you can do that. That's it for my discussion on the Oscar shorts nominees this year. Don't forget, all my predictions for these and everything else are updated at least once a week, and even more frequently as we get closer to March 15th. On the Award Expert app, you can follow me over there, and you can also see all my quick little blurbs about any new watches I throw up on Letterboxd, and I'm under the Awards Garage. If you are into channel memberships and you want to help me out for as little as a couple bucks a month, click join down below, and you can read all about it. I will see you guys out here very, very soon in the garage.